Okay, next thing I'm going to test on my car is the air idle control valve. Now the air idle control valve is just here on an S2. This is a 944 S2 89 model, just there between number 1 and 2 cylinders, I think it is, at the front of the engine. You can just see it there underneath, and the electrical connector's just on top there. Now I've removed the wire and that will just pop off easily. Now what I'm hoping is that if I can get that clamp bolt undone, I should be able to slide the air control valve out of its clamp from underneath the inlet manifold and then disconnect it, test it, clean it, possibly replace it and put it back without taking the inlet manifold off. So that's the object. Now what this valve does, is pretty critical, is obviously when you're cold start you've got your throttle closed, so the butterfly is shutting off all air from the air filter, so your engine's got no air at all, and yet it wants a lot of fuel and air when you're starting up. The engine control unit will pulse more fuel for a cold start, and it's looking for a little bit more air than it can get with the throttle closed. So what it does is it measures the temperature of the engine, senses that the engine's cold via the engine coolant temperature sensor there, water temperature sensor, tells it the engine's cold, pulses more fuel into the engine for a cold start, and it also opens up this valve which allows air from before the butterfly to bypass the throttle and go into the inlet manifold direct. So basically it taps out of here, this hose at the top here, I think it is, no it's not, it's this hose here, sorry. Okay, so here we are from the air filter, the AFM, through to the throttle here, throttle body just a bit beyond. Here there's a tapping off here, and this goes to the air idle control valve up here, and the other side of that air idle control valve then feeds air directly into the inlet underneath the inlet there, just in front of the throttle body. So you're basically bypassing the throttle body and allowing air through, and when the engine control unit senses that the engine is getting hot or warm, has warmed up via this sensor here, the water temperature sensor, then it will shut that valve off, close off the bypass air to the inlet, and then it will just have to rely on the air that's coming through the throttle body there. So what we're going to do is we're going to undo the two clamps on the hoses. There's one here, undo that one and undo the one at the bottom, and hopefully pull this valve out. Now the only way to get that clamp undone is to use a ratchet wrench. This is me using wrenches now instead of spanners, and that is one of these babies, because although you can squeeze it in there, it's a 13mm, you've got very little travel arc on the spanner itself, so you have to have a ratchet. There's no other way to it. I don't think you can get that from underneath. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be able to get to that nut from underneath. So if you don't want to take the inlet off, that's what you need, one of these babies. It will take a while, but it will come off. So mine is pretty loose now, and it's almost finger loose. And I'm hoping that if I can remove that a bit more, that will actually push out. So that's the next step. Well, here's the moment of truth. I've pushed the air idle control valve out of its clamp. I've undone both the connections, one of which, just a recap, is here on the inlet. And the other one is right underneath the manifold there, which is tricky to get to, but is doable. And now it's loose. I'm looking, hopefully, to pull that one out. Yeah, how about that? So, oops, dropped it. There we have it. Now, air idle control valve. Normally it sits just there underneath the inlet manifold, and basically allows air in for cold starts into the inlet manifold from before the throttle body, before the throttle butterfly. Lovely jubbly. So it's possible to do that quite easily without removing the inlet manifold. Saved me a lot of work. So now what I can do is I can test that more easily. I can strip it and clean it, check that it's operating okay. I can reconnect it out here loose and actually watch its operation. Could possibly put some clear tube on and actually check that it's actually closing properly and opening. I can either put it back in its original position or possibly mount it somewhere else. It doesn't have to be mounted there. It can be mounted anywhere that's close enough to the electrical connector. I suppose it's going to have to go back there, isn't it? Yeah, unless I extend that connector. But anyway, great, it's off. I can clean and test that. This is the idle air control valve from my 944 S2. It's a 1989 model and it has 2 pins, 2 terminals. Although some of the earlier ones have 3, so you need to watch out for that if you're replacing it. I'm going to try and recover this one. I'm pretty sure that this was the problem for my hard starting. It's got no part number on it, so that's been lost. But as far as I can work out, the part number is 0280140514. I'll put that up on the video at some stage for reference. But anyway, as far as I can work out, this is default position is open, which is strange because I would have expected it to be default closed. The way this works is that when you're cold starting the engine, it allows a certain amount of air past the throttle. You've got the butterfly in the throttle body. At idle, it's normally closed, or very shut off anyway. And with the additional fuel that's metered into the engine for cold starting, you need additional air, which is provided by this bypass. And a hose is connected on each of these and goes around the throttle body to feed air into the inlet, the extra air. When it's not required, this shuts that off, and then all the air is metered through the AFM. So obviously when this is open and air is bleeding out through bypassing the throttle body, the AFM can't measure all the air. But it doesn't matter because it's a cold start mechanism. As soon as the engine starts to warm up, and usually within 10 to 15 seconds or so, this will shut off, cutting off the additional air supply, and the engine will just warm up normally. Now this one I think has been sticking and jamming. I'm pretty sure it's not been operating properly because I've been having a cold start issue. And what I've done is, and you can actually dismantle these and clean them out, but I'm going to hopefully just clean it from the outside. And what I'm doing is I'm just using some ordinary choke and carb cleaner, which I normally use on my carburetors. That will work very well. You'll need to use it in a ventilated area because this will really send your head spinning. And you need a 12 volt supply. You could use one of these so-called engine boosters, which you can actually start the car with. I've started my car and my van with this. It's just lithium ion. They're very useful. They output 12 volts, 16 and 19 volts. But for the car, it's obviously 12 volt with a separate output. It's quite useful. But all I generally tend to use for this sort of thing, especially my injectors, if I want to flash my injectors, is just an ordinary 9 volt PP3. And what I've done is I've soldered a 3.8mm female spade connector on the negative, or one end, doesn't matter which really, it doesn't matter which way round you put it on, so that you can then connect that to any of these terminals, which are also 3.8. So all the sensors in the car, the air idle control valve, the injectors, they all have 3.8mm terminals. Now, as that happens, unfortunately I seem to have got a bit of solder in that, so it won't actually slide on there, so I'm going to have to hold it on. But anyway, all you need to do is just connect that onto one terminal, hold it on there, that's that, and then with the other one, don't hold it on whatever you do, because it will burn out the coil. This is just a coil in here which when energized acts like a relay or a solenoid, and it obviously moves something inside which cuts off the air supply. So you just flash it, basically you just stroke it across very quickly. So if you listen, you should hear the valve working. and you can see the flash as I'm flashing this across. You can actually see the arc. Now that's working really nicely now because I put some choke and carb cleaner through it, and I've cleaned it out as best I can with some tissue and a long screwdriver inside here, both sides. I can't show you because it's just too dark. But that's now operating really nicely, and I'm happy that that should work properly, providing that the ECU sees the correct data from the engine temperature sensor and other sensors and operates this correctly when the engine's cold. And I'll have to test that out. It could be that there might still be a fault with the wiring from this to the engine management unit, the engine control unit. I'll have to check that at the ECU. But for now, I'm happy that that's going to work okay. But interestingly enough, its default position is open, it looks like to me. But I can check that when it's on the car, because I just simply blow down the hose when the ignition is on. I'll turn the ignition on, I'll blow down the hose, and if I can blow air through, then that means that the default position is open. Which means that the ECU, when the car is running normally, has to provide a voltage to this continually while you're driving along to shut this off, to prevent the additional air supply. And I would have expected it to be the other way around, so the default position is closed and it needs to supply the 12 volts to actually open it momentarily, because this is only on operating, I think, when the engine's cold, for about 10 to 15 seconds, very little time, and it shouldn't need then to operate again at all, as far as I'm aware. But anyway, that's it. So I'll give that a test tomorrow on the car. I'll connect up the hoses again, connect that up to the loom, to the ECU, and then I'll turn the ignition on and crank it, and I'll test to see whether that actually is opening and shutting as it should. So hopefully that's useful. Oh, and the other thing you need to do before I forget is clean these terminals up. I mean, I'm using just a little bit of sandpaper, and you need to clean them quite thoroughly, because resistance in these connections really kills these components. The resistance sets up, drops the voltage, and you don't get sufficient voltage. So just give them a good clean all round as well while you're there.